Hey everybody, Plushie here, and I apologize for the long wait, but finally we are going to talk about the brand new servant for this collab event, who is not just a long-awaited single target, but is also a brand new class. Of course, today we're going to be talking about Draco, or Sodom's Beast, or Nero, or whatever you want to call her, and she is a brand new single target Beast class servant. And is she really as broken as people make her to be, or is it just typical new class hype? Let's take a look at Draco. And of course, before we even take a look at her skills and MP, we have to first talk about her class. She belongs to the Beast class, which is heavily implied is going to be unique for every beast that is released after her, so this is probably only going to be for her. But let's take a look at it. So she deals 1.5 times damage to all of the normal 7 classes minus berserkers. So she does 1.5 times damage to sabers, archers, lancers, riders, casters, and assassins. And she also does double damage to berserkers like every other class except for berserkers, of course. And she also takes half from all of these 7 classes, meaning that she is just super broken against any of these classes. And of course, she is the second ever class after foreigners to fully counter berserkers. So yeah, this is very strong, but of course here is the trade-off where she does half damage and takes double from every single extra class minus other beasts, which is going to be neutral for beasts. Draco's first skill is a 10% MP charge per turn effect for 6 turns, as well as a 6-time 30% critical damage up that doesn't have a duration, as well as a 1000 damage cut for 6 times that also doesn't have a duration, all on a 7-turn cooldown. I think this skill is actually pretty mediocre. The 10 MP per turn for 6 turns straight, also only on a 7-turn cooldown, quote unquote only, makes this almost a perpetual effect, and it might look a little bit broken at first, but then you realize, with recent servants especially, this can even be a passive effect. So it's actually not that broken, especially considering the other 2 effects aren't that amazing either. The crit buff isn't the standard 50%, it is only a 30% and it only lasts for 6 hits. If you're running her solo, this is only going to last 2 to 3 turns most of the time, and if you're putting her in the team, sometimes it can last 4 to 5 turns, but obviously it will only still just proc 6 times, especially considering she has a triple buster deck, and sometimes you do want to run her with critical damage. This isn't going to last that much, and it only is 30%, so it's relatively small for a crit skill. And this also applies to her damage cut. It is only 1000 and it's only 6 hits, so once again in solos this is generally only going to last 2 turns, and in a team of course it can last very long as well. And both of these skills don't have any duration, so technically you are able to stack them, but this skill is on a 7-turn cooldown, so it is very unrealistic to stack any of these skills twice. And even if you do, 60% critical damage up for at most like 1 or 2 hits isn't actually that amazing, and also not worth all this work. Draco's second skill is an AoE skill seal, as well as an AoE 5000 damage burn for 3 turns, and also a 500% chance to charge all enemy MP gauges by 1 as a demerit, and it also increases her own attack by 40% for 3 turns, and finally it grants herself a holding holy grail status for 3 turns, which is very important to trigger her third skill effects. This is also not blockable, nor is it removable. It's not really a buff, so yeah, at least it will guarantee you to land it, but it is not perpetual, so you would still have to time it approximately with the third skill. So this skill at a 6-turn cooldown is once again very mid. The AoE 1-turn skill seal is usually a positive effect in my opinion, but of course sometimes it can be negative, especially if you're soloing. And also the burn is kind of not really a real effect. It is 5,000, it is a really big burn, but honestly you would really not bring her for a burn team because she doesn't have any other burn support on top of this. And it also has a hefty demerit, which is an AoE gauge charge by 1. Sometimes this can be a positive. Let's say if you have multiple enemies with misaligned MP gauges, and some of them are 1 turn off and some of them are already about to MP, you can actually use this to align all of their MPs and tank all of them with a singular hard survival effect. But this skill, because of its grail trait application effect is actually not able to be saved to be used at an optimal time. So this sort of interesting application is sort of lost because of the other effects tied to it. And 3 turn 40% attack up is probably my favorite effect on this skill. It's not timed, it's just a straight up 3 turn 40% attack up, which is extremely solid. Draco's third skill gives her a 1-time 3 turn 100% buff removal resist that doesn't scale with level, which is pretty awesome. That means you don't really have to lord this skill for this effect to happen normally. But that's it. That's the only base effect of this skill if she doesn't have the holding Holy Grail status. So you absolutely only want to use this skill if she has that status, which is applied via her skill 2. And if she does have that status, she has a bunch of effects from this skill. The anti-dragon power mod is kind of okay, it's common enough, and the anti-Roman power mod is actually really important for her because as rare as Roman servants are, this event actually gives you a 5-star command code that is able to apply 5 turns worth of Roman trait on the enemy when attacking with that card. I think Draco is actually 2 different tiers depending on if you have this command code or not, so you should definitely try to acquire this command code. But this also means that if somehow you skip this event and you pulled her in a future rerun and they never rerun the command code, Draco is actually going to be a significantly worse servant just because she doesn't have the command code, in my personal opinion. So this is a strong effect, but it's tied to the command code, which will kind of make it a universal 40% power mod, which is really good. She also has the 20-30 effect for 3 turns, which is kind of okay. She also has debuff immunity for 1 time that doesn't have any duration, which is really nice. That means you can just use this whenever and have that effect not be wasted until the enemy actually debuffs you. But once again, it's only 1 time, so it's not really good against like a lot of debuff spamming enemies such as Cernunos. It also has a defense ignore for 3 turns, which is a very premium effect. Not a lot of servants have that, and it is straight up 3 turns that isn't tied to MP that will affect both her face cards and MP. So this is a really good effect in my opinion for challenge quests. Of course, it only pops up when the challenge quest has a high defense that is not removable, but when that happens, she's a good choice. She also has a heal boost by 20% for 3 turns, which is kind of lame because she doesn't have a self-heal effect. You would absolutely have to pair another healer with her, or else this effect is just completely useless. Even with a heal command code, because of its 3-turn cooldown, I don't think this is a great effect. You absolutely have to pair her with another healer to see this, go into effect. And finally, a slow charge effect, which is huge. It's a 20% charge per turn for 3 turns, so it absolutely helps her farm along with her first skill. But it being tied to, skill 2 and it having a 7-turn cooldown makes it just a decent skill. I don't think it's absolutely broken in any way. And her passives, surprisingly weak for a beast. Usually beasts have a plethora of broken passives, but not Draco. She has Authority of the Beast C, which is a 10% critical damage buff. We've seen that on basically every other beast. And she also has Independent Manifestation that is exceptionally weak with only a 2% additional crit buff. And of course, the insta-kill resistance by 2%, basically nothing. And mental debuff resistance by 2%, also basically nothing. And finally, her Nega skill is Nega Messiah EX. Wow, that sounds really cool. What does it do? It increases her own debuff success rate by 500%. Yeah, this can actually be a super broken effect on some other servants, such as Kama, who is super charm reliant, but all Draco has is a 5000 burn and an AoE skill seal. She is absolutely not a great debuffer. The only saving grace with this effect is once again the anti-Roman command code, which will apply 5 turns of Roman debuff on the enemy. Yes, the Roman trait is treated as a debuff on this command code, and it is super important for her game plan, so this effect will actually almost guarantee the Roman debuff to land unless the enemy has a debuff immunity. This will basically go past every debuff resistance effect. So it's really good if you have the command code. So once again, the servant is really good if you have a command code, but kind of whatever if you don't. And finally, her MP is a single target 8-hit arts MP that doesn't have any base effect, but has a relatively powerful overcharge effect that allows her to do extra damage against servants of the 7 basic classes, which of course includes sabers, archers, lancers, riders, assassins, casters, and berserkers, and it scales with overcharge from 150% all the way up to 200%. So a fairly loopable MP with no base effect but a seemingly broken overcharge. However, do note that it is only servants, and these are exceedingly rare in main story quests in particular, not just all the monsters, the Lost Spell trees, like ORT, Surtur, Cernunos, and all the calamities. None of these are obviously servants. Even servant-looking enemies that are in Lost Spells are actually not considered servants many cases, such as Skadi, God Juna, all of the Fey Knights and Morgan in Lost Spell 6, Yumeiren and Shang Yu. None of these are actually considered servants when they're on the enemy side. Unfortunately, this is a deceptive MP that make it seem like it has a super wide coverage, but in reality, especially in main story quests once again, might even be worse than Anti-Earth. I will concede though, this usually does hit in event challenge quests because basically all of them are servants. Although Draco's MP anti-trade coverage isn't nearly as large as it initially might seem, it is very consistent however in 90++ farming, because minus the 2 special cases where they actually used Moon Cancers as the final wave boss, all of the 90++s has servants of these 7 classes as the final wave large HP damage check boss for farming. And Draco is going to be able to reach the damage threshold a lot easier compared to her other peers because she not only deals the extra 1.5 times class advantage damage, she also does the 150% extra anti-trait damage. So yeah, once again, compared to some of her other peers, which in my opinion are, at least in farming, single target berserkers such as Vlad or Kriemhild, she's going to be able to hit that damage threshold a lot easier and at a lot lower MP level. So this is ironically a very good farming MP, probably a even better farming MP than it is a main boss killing MP in my opinion. So how do I feel about Draco? First of all, we'll actually have to talk about her farming, which despite her being a single target, her multi-hit arts MP paired with her massive 30% passive charge per turn effect actually allows her to loop her MP quite well. With double Castoria, she does loop quite a bit worse than her main competition in my opinion, which is Vlad. However, as you start removing arts buffs and Castorias from your team, which will happen in most 90++s, she starts to become a little bit better because she doesn't really rely on natural refund from her MP, but instead relies on the 30% passive charge, which will not decrease even if you remove the arts buffs that you put on her. Of course, the other trade-off is that she doesn't have any form of direct MP charge, and it might hurt her flexibility in events where there are no event CEs that has any starting charge. A very good friend of mine, Sunder, who also has a very cool YouTube channel where he does crazy min turns with his 120 Kukulkan, but also a level 2 Arjuna Altar as well as a level 2 Summer Eris, did the calculations for me where he simulates previous 90++s and replaced majority of the art single target DPSs used with Draco, and she basically is able to do all of them with the exact same setup as well. So the initial charge might not be nearly as big of an issue as I made it sound. But of course, her biggest edge perhaps in 90++ farming is her anti-trait on her MP. This will hit basically every single end boss for 90++ nodes minus a few exceptions. And yeah, she doesn't need nearly as much MP levels when compared to her peers in order to hit that damage threshold. But on the flip side, she absolutely does, kind of pathetic damage against non-servants. She does have quite high of an attack stat, but it's not quite enough to pull her damage back into even acceptable range when it's not against servants and it's low MP. So she is even out damaged by someone like Vlad, who isn't known for high damage at all, and she's completely destroyed by someone like Kintoki in terms of farming damage when she isn't fighting a servant. But of course, we can't talk about this servant only with how she farms, considering a huge part of her selling point, at least in the class alignment part, is her defensive advantage against these 7 classes. And first and foremost, I don't think her class is broken. Of course, she is trading for the coverage against extra classes for the absolute dominance against the first 7 classes, and that is obviously very powerful. However, in a challenge quest and high difficulty main story quest, whatever context, the trade-off is actually pretty huge because she has complete disadvantage against extra classes, meaning she dies to them very easily as well as do no damage to them. On top of that, she is also a servant that doesn't have a lot of self-steroids, and her MP's overcharge doesn't work on extra class servants. It is only servants of the first 7 classes, so she has absolutely no way of dealing with any extra class if you just sprinkle a little bit of them within a long fight, which is usually the case for recent challenge quests. They're usually gauntlets with multiple servants, and at least 1 or 2 of them is going to be extra class, and she's going to absolutely struggle against them unless you hyper invest in your copy. As for what she gets in return, which is the defensive advantage against these 7 classes, I think it's strong but definitely not game breaking. If you are using her in a standard arts team, the team already provides a lot of defensive abilities with Castoria, Proto Merlin, or even Mash if you want some more long-term soft defense, so you don't really need to run a full-on defensive advantaged character. Also, she doesn't have any good self-sustaining nor hard defense skills to support her solo playstyle, because I think class advantage in the defensive side is really significant in solos, but unfortunately she is not a great solo servant either. And just like most people wouldn't bring rulers in a standard team to kill bosses just because they take less damage, I don't think this will be the case either for Draco. So yeah, once again, good trade-off, but not broken trade-off. In most challenge quests, you will be pairing her with other art supports, and she is a decent MP looper, and the Roman command codes really mitigate a part of her damage even when she is not fighting servants. So overall, yeah, really decent, I guess, even though damage might be a little bit lacking. If you do like her and you did invest into her MP levels or even grails, she can perform pretty similar jobs as to someone like Vlad or Summer Eris or Kriemhild or whatnot. But of course, she cannot fight any extra classes. This is once again a thing that I really dislike about this character because of how common they are. They even appear as trash mobs in main story, and they always appear in challenge quests as at least that 1 or 2 rare servant of the entire gauntlet lineup. Obviously, I'm not trying to call her a trash servant, I just think people put in too much expectations for her since she is initially kind of advertised, I guess not really advertised, but initially she does seem like one of the omni damage dealers that everyone should own. However, I do think, especially in a more established account, she is even more of a niche counter, specifically against servants of these 7 classes, which if you do only bring her against these enemies, she is extremely good, and most of my complaints that I had with her just disappear completely. In conclusion, I think Draco is an extremely interesting character, but a little bit overrated. Her greatest strength as well as her greatest weakness is her class and her role for a newer unestablished account earlier on in the story, compared to her role in a more established late game account, shifts drastically from a generalist universal damage dealer to a niche counter against servants of the 7 classes specifically. I just think that maybe if you already have a pre-established single target arts berserker, she might be a little bit of a disappointing pull, as she probably wouldn't serve their job much better, or probably even worse in certain cases, compared to what you already have. I know I have dragged on this video for way too long. She is definitely one of the more complicated characters to rate for me, especially since I do plan to bring her to 120, so some of my opinions might be skewed. I have many versions of this script, ranging from a very negative one to a super positive one, but I ended up settling for this, which is sort of a middle ground take in my personal opinion. And of course, I hope you guys enjoyed regardless, and the best of luck on pulling for Draco, because she is still one of the coolest servants in recent memory in my opinion. Hope you guys enjoyed, and see you guys in the next one.
れてやろう。